All right, great to be here, everyone. So today we're going to go over what I call leverage cybersecurity, and as Adam said, how to stay ahead and not behind the pace of change. So in addition to this leverage cybersecurity model, I'm also going to go over what I call some game changers or some inflection points that we've seen across the cybersecurity industry. And then what I'm going to do is close with a thought on what I call you versus AI. I know we hear a lot about AI. We're going to take a little bit of a different spin on that topic, though. So let's dive in. So 3 years ago, the cybersecurity landscape was very different than what we see today. And if we think about it, we were to fast forward about 3 years from now, it could very well be unrecognizable. Now, the question I want to explore with you all today is, are you ready for what's ahead? You might recall when phishing emails, they were very easy to detect, right? You saw suspicious-looking domain names, a lot of grammatical errors. Today, we don't see that anymore. Attackers are leveraging AI to write emails that look a lot more legitimate. They're also being a lot more clever. So what we're seeing is they're reaching out to our employees using the tools that we use, whether it be Slack, whether it be Teams. And they're also looking at how can they bypass our defenses. They're using techniques such as QR codes that our email security tools don't do a good job of scanning. So we know there are no rules of engagement when it comes to cyber threats. Equally, every week we're seeing that millions of individuals, their data is becoming part of a data breach. Social security numbers, medical records. Show of hands, how many of you in the last year have received a letter in the mail that says your data was a part of a data breach? Almost everyone. I received 2. And we do know that lives are absolutely being disrupted by the fraud that's caused by these data breaches. We also know that deep fakes, they are no longer science fiction. They're real. Earlier this year, I read about an employee that received an invite to join a video call with their chief financial officer. Of course, it was what you would expect from a phishing attack. It was an urgent inquiry to join this call. They joined the call with who they believed to be their CFO, but it was a deep fake. But before that employee realized it, what did they do? They wired $25 million to this threat actor. So the question is, are your employees ready for deep fake attacks? So this is why we need to rethink cybersecurity and rethink our approach to cybersecurity. We know that regulators, they're rethinking cybersecurity all the time, right? But compliance alone won't save us. We need to move faster. We need to be smarter. And we need to be much more strategic. So before we dive into this leveraged cybersecurity model, I want to talk a little bit about what I call the cybersecurity S-curve. Because knowing where you're on this S-curve, it could mean staying ahead and countering attacks, or perhaps waking up to a not-so-fun moment in the middle of the night when you're getting a call. And we're going to go over a couple of those stories as well. So the S-curve, you typically hear about it in the context of business, right? But it also applies to cybersecurity, and you'll see it looks something like what you see here on this screen. So picture 2 companies for a moment, both on the same path towards growth. You know, Adam talked a bit about, organizations looking to grow and to scale, and that tends to happen, right? You face a number of different obstacles, and you continue to mature on your way to various levels of success. But along the way, these companies, they hit a crossroad, right? A potential where they've got one of 2 paths that they need to take. One company decides that they're going to make a choice that's going to lead them to growth, they're going to continue to thrive, while the other, they take a different choice. And that choice leads them to fade into irrelevance and potentially become obsolete. But the question is, what happened here? What triggered one company to succeed while the other company stalled out? So that triggers an inflection point. It's a turn of events, a point where a company has to adapt, they have to react, they have to respond. But if you hesitate in that moment of hesitation, well, you might fall behind. And so we're going to get into cybersecurity next, but think about 2 companies where this happened, where there was a major inflection point within their industry that forever changed their business. How about Netflix and Blockbuster? Right, digital streaming, it was a big inflection point in the movie rental industry. We saw that Netflix adapted, right? They went from mailing DVDs to full digital streaming. But Blockbuster, on the other hand, they didn't. They stayed stuck in their old model. And we know how that story ended. So cybersecurity, we have our own inflection points, right? At points where we have to adapt and we have to take action, because the consequences, if we don't, could have ripple effects on our organizations. Now, those that recognize and adapt to these inflection points, well, they mature, and as you see here, they stay ahead of the threat curve. But others, well, they do risk falling behind. Now, our industry, we've been shaped by a number of different inflection points, moments that we've had to shift our focus. Now, we've seen a lot of different breaches over the years when you think back to the likes of Yahoo or maybe even Equifax. But there were other pivotal moments that really required us to rethink how we approach cybersecurity. Let's go over a few of those turning points. So the first was the Morris worm, way back in 1988. 10% of the internet was affected by what was the first major cyber breach. Now, some say that this was the worm that led to the birth of cybersecurity. What we do know, though, is it really uncovered the fact that we've got an inherent risk the more we've got our systems interconnected. Now, if you fast forward to 2013, we saw the Snowden leaks, where the leaks exposed extensive government surveillance such that there are a lot of governments across the world that they shifted how they think about data privacy. Countries like the UK, Canada, and India all now have their own data privacy and data protection policies, where one of their goals is to counter government surveillance. Now, if you do any business with any companies overseas, you've likely felt the impact of these different changes. So then came SolarWinds, right, where a software update effectively put a Trojan horse in the network of 18,000 companies. But this incident wasn't just an attack on SolarWinds, it was an attack on the trust in our software supply chain. And what was our response, right? We had to rethink code development and code integrity processes. Now, we all know about CrowdStrike and the impact on 8.5 million Windows systems. One change, one single point of failure. We saw that it grounded airlines. It impacted hospital facilities. Delta said it cost them $500 million. Now, this wasn't a hack, right? It wasn't a malicious event, but it was a misstep, and a very costly misstep. So what we can expect here is greater scrutiny on our third-party vendors. Expect greater scrutiny on the cybersecurity software you deploy and its potential to impact your business. And expect greater scrutiny on technology concentration risk and how a single vendor or a single change could impact your business. So what's next? How do we maintain momentum through our next inflection point? We know every business will face one. The question is, will you be ready when the moment arrives? But what's driving this accelerated pace of change? You know, we talk a lot about change, and it is absolutely a constant, whether it be technological change or cybersecurity change. I would say at the heart of it is digital transformation. Most organizations are undergoing some form of digital transformation, whether it be migrating to the cloud, consolidating technologies, or adopting new AI solutions or other emerging technologies. But we do know that with every technology advancement, new cyber risks surface for us to confront. Now, in parallel, we know that these new tech changes, they prompt new regulations, new compliance mandates, whether it's the payment card standards if you're processing credit cards, the government standards if you're a government contractor. But compliance alone is not enough. Remember, compliance is a baseline and not a strategy. I'll say that again. Compliance is a baseline and not a strategy. So don't over-rely on compliance to drive your cybersecurity programs. Now, the pace of change, it doesn't just apply to technology, it also applies to cyber threats. Cyber criminals are becoming much more organized, more creative, more relentless, and they don't have any empathy. If you think about it, we're seeing an increase in cyber attackers targeting healthcare organizations. Why do you think that is? It's because they know if lives are on the line, the likelihood of their ransom getting paid is much higher. That's the type of threat we're up against. And just around the corner, we stand on the brink of a new significant inflection point in quantum computing. So soon, quantum computers will be so sophisticated that they can decrypt the encryption methods that we all rely upon today. And attackers, they're preparing now. They're stealing encrypted data so that way they can decrypt it when the technology catches up. So how many of you are thinking ahead and preparing as well? We also live in a very connected world, right? You think back to what I just mentioned earlier with the Morris worm. This inherent interconnectedness creates vulnerabilities for us. And now we see with IoT is your refrigerators to your power outlets are now online, effectively expanding the attack surface and giving attackers more points where they might be able to breach us. Now, don't get me wrong. I enjoy using my own Alexa and having Alexa turn on my living room lights, but we have to consider what are all the inherent vulnerabilities and the risks when we start to connect all these various devices onto the internet. So here's a crucial question for you all. How many of you all are thinking ahead at what is the next move of cyber criminals? Once you implement those shiny controls on your roadmap, what will be the attacker's next move? What's their counter move? Cybersecurity is a little bit like chess. You've got to start thinking 3 moves ahead and really starting to prepare. Now, we also know that 5G promises greater speed, greater connectivity, but it also brings about new risk. Every new technology, as I mentioned, it expands our ever-growing attack surface. And when we implement these new shiny controls or new technologies with old vulnerable systems, ultimately we compound the risk. So how do we keep up in this rapid, relentless pace of change? It's not about having the latest tools or the biggest budgets or the best technology. It's really about strategy. So we're going to cover 3 key strategies, and the first strategy I'm going to go into now. So the first pillar is what I call anchoring on core operating principles. Early in my career, the CIO that I worked for at the time, they had a missed call from the FBI. You never want to have a missed call from the FBI, by the way. But the FBI said, get a hold of your CISO and contact me immediately. So my CIO was frustrated, didn't know how to react to that particular voicemail, and asked me to call the FBI agent. So I called the FBI agent, and he commences to tell me that they observed an advanced persistent threat actor, a foreign nation state actor that they have been tracking, accessing our systems. He said, dig into it, investigate it, and follow up with me. So I contacted the CIO and I said, hey, here's the situation. And they were quite upset. And turned to me and said, why are you so calm? I said, I can only operate from the information I have today and take it one step at a time. So I turned to my team and we launched an incident response set of actions. And what we found is, yes, the cyber threat actor was accessing our external systems, and they did partially authenticate to those systems, but MFA blocked them in this instance. That's something the FBI wasn't able to see on their side. We did bring in a third party to validate our findings just for the abundance of caution, which they did, and the CIO couldn't be happier. Now, I say all that to say that the first principle to anchor on here is to stay calm when you're dealing with these sort of events. Not every crisis is a capital C crisis. And staying calm isn't about just ignoring the urgency, but it's about harnessing it. And if your team see that you've lost your cool and you're not calm and composed, they're going to be frustrated and on edge as well, and that's going to impact their ability to perform their job to investigate. Another call that I received during my career was in the middle of the night, 2 a.m. in the morning, and one of my leaders said, we see indications that a third-party potential threat actor is accessing some of our service accounts. And so I joined this conference call. It was the security team, it was the network team, and at the time, they hadn't yet identified how the threat actor was actually got in or logged into the network. And so I asked the network engineer at the time, I said, hey, is there any other way to access this network that we're not seeing? And they said, no, well, we just passed a compliance audit, not too long ago. And then I heard some pause in their voice as they were looking at the network configuration settings, and they said, oh, there's another VPN profile that's connected, and it doesn't have MFA. We found the root cause. So the principle to anchor on here is to never confuse being compliant with being secure. Technology is dynamic. Cybersecurity is dynamic. And any compliance audit is just a snapshot in time. So we want to focus on continuous verification. Now, the last key principle here is that technologists must own their system security. When you own a home, you don't rely on your neighbors or your insurance company to say, hey, lock your doors and close your windows at night, right? The same goes for technology. We must maintain security management in the same way we maintain performance management. That's what it means to be a good technology owner. Okay, so now we're going to dive into pillar number 2, what I call the leverage cybersecurity model. This is going to be your blueprint to really deploy your cybersecurity solutions faster, to keep up with this ever-evolving technology landscape that we're in. Now, this matrix, it's not about what tools to use. Too often in technology, we always lead with the technology solutions, but we don't always consider how do we orchestrate the people and the processes such that we have a well-oiled machine. So today we're going to cover leverage people and user experience, leverage technology, as well as leverage processes. We'll start with people. So we talked a little bit about change, right? Change is inevitable, but friction isn't. Yes, cybersecurity often introduces friction, but it doesn't always have to. How often are you thinking about ways to reduce friction? How often are you thinking about the cybersecurity solutions that you deploy and whether or not you deploy those in a way that you could have reduced the impact on your teams? Now, every change is going to affect different people, different personas in different ways, whether it be end users, admins, executives, third parties. Reducing friction, it really first requires unpacking which personas are involved, which personas might be impacted. How will the changes affect their work? And one thing we often forget is, what are the operating models we need to have in place once that change is actually in place? As an example, if your change will flood the help desk with calls, well, let's bring them into the planning process. Now, you can't unilaterally deploy cybersecurity solutions if those solutions might cripple your business. It might have the impact to cripple your business. Doing so will absolutely lose support for the rest of your roadmap. So you want to make sure that you align with those key stakeholders and all those different personas that I mentioned. So the key here is you want to focus on who versus how. This is about early engagement with the people in your organization who will feel that change the most. Then you want to lead with the why before the what. Too often we jump into, particularly from security, what new protocols do we need to follow? What new technology changes do we need to make? Without explaining why it's important. You want to minimize the gap between your understanding of the change and those impacted stakeholders that I mentioned. So the next goal is you want to make sure that your changes stick. We know people naturally resist change, right? Most of the time it's not about the friction itself, it's just about uncertainty. And if it's a cybersecurity control, often what we find is they wonder, is this tool going to monitor me and my activity? So it's our job to clear up that uncertainty. But don't be boring. Your communication doesn't have to come across like a policy. Be creative. Use creative methods. Think about when you're scrolling on social media, pick your favorite social media app. What is it that captured your attention? Consider using those methods. Well, keep it professional, of course. But use those methods in your training and your security awareness events. Attention-grabbing headlines. Short videos, maybe even a little humor. When you make it memorable, that's when you allow those changes to stick and be better adopted. Now, use enforcement as well, meaning you want to set secure, always-on configurations. One of my kids, they had a bad habit where anytime they left the house, no matter where they were going or what time it was, they would always leave the garage door open. So what do? We implemented a system that after 30 minutes, that garage door is always going to close automatically. So in forced settings, they always work best. So now we're going to shift gears into technology. Over-relying on a single technology vendor is a risk we can no longer ignore. Look at what happened to Change Healthcare, where vendor concentration crippled hospitals, surgery centers, medical offices. So you might ask, how do we mitigate this risk? Well, first you want to apply data redundancy. You want to keep a backup of your critical data, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, such that if that primary system goes down, you then have a backup. Second, you want to embrace vendor diversity, meaning relying upon one vendor for everything is a dangerous single point of failure. Now, if you must, I get it, sometimes it's required, due to cost constraints or otherwise, hold that vendor accountable to having resilient architecture models. And third, consider deploying redundant capabilities. That way, if one of your capabilities fails, you've got the other as a backup to keep those critical functions up and running. Now, you don't have to deploy these strategies everywhere across your network, right? Start with your crown jewels or the assets that are most critical to your business. And then consider if you've got certain technology layers that you can target, technology layers that might be most vulnerable, or areas across your architecture where you have the highest concentration risk. So your next goal is to optimize your architecture. It's not just about having the best tools, it's about how you use those tools. So first, you want to optimize your solution level architecture. You want to fine-tune those solutions, whatever those solutions might be, at an endpoint or a network, whatever technology stack or solution that is. You want to configure it in such a way that you want to maximize that investment. Next, think about the various technology layers themselves. So it could be the network layer. As an example, evaluate if your ingress and your egress flows align with your security standards. And then finally, take a step back and look at your enterprise global architecture. How are all the solutions and layers working in harmony in a way that provides you an effective, seamless cyber defense system? Now, to achieve these optimizations, you ultimately need to anchor on proven architecture design patterns. I also like to look at, when I think about design patterns, I also like to look at what's happening in the world. Across the cyber threat landscape. Are the breaches in the news, would they be effective if they were attacking me with those type of techniques? How would my architecture stand up to that? So use those as learning opportunities to make sure that your readiness is on par with some of the attacks that are happening out there in the world. Now let's talk about leverage processes, right? No one likes bureaucratic red tape. Those processes where it creates more work for the sake of it. In cybersecurity, we often create these processes for our employees all the time. So we want to keep processes lean. We want to be standardized. And we also want to be clear on who's responsible for what. How many have kids that drive their own cars? Quite a few. I've got 2. So consider roles and responsibility in the context of your kid's car. But let's say there's no clarity on who's supposed to get the oil change. The kid says, well, you're paying the car note. I thought you were supposed to get the oil change for me. But the parent says, no, well, I thought you were getting the oil change. It's your car. And the engine locks up, and the car stops working. So you've got to get clear on who does what so the car stays safe and your business stays safe. So now we've come to the third and final pillar, what I call you versus AI. Now imagine coming to work one day, and your boss says, we've got a third-party consultant that has an AI tool that's proven capable of replacing 50% of your team. Does that sound far-fetched? Maybe today, right? But in 5 years, maybe 10 years? The digital era has forever changed our lives and will continue to as technology continues to evolve. AI is everywhere now, from the apps on our phone or these self-driving cars that I saw outside this week, which was a shocker to me. In any case, putting AI aside, or AI robots that, in these autonomous vehicles, how we make a living, how we feed our families, and how we impact the world has forever changed. Every industry is seeing disruption from AI. Companies know if we don't embrace it, well, we risk falling behind. And the same goes for cybersecurity. If we don't keep pace with the changes in technology, if we don't keep pace with the cyber threats, well, we might lose. So what's our next move? How do we stay relevant in this AI-driven world? Now, the truth is, we won't solve all of our technology problems on the back of AI. AI is limited. AI looks backwards. It analyzes data and it synthesizes it really in the only way it knows how, using algorithms, using learning models. And if you really think about it, AI doesn't innovate, it imitates. Your human intelligence is better than artificial intelligence. You bring EQ, intuition, contextual understanding. With AI, we've got to provide it the right prompts, right? The right inquiries in order to get the right responses that we're looking for. And sure, it can process data at lightning speed, but it needs human context. It needs your context in order to get to the right answers. But there is a catch. If your teams don't evolve, if you don't evolve, then you risk falling behind. Your programs might fall behind, and your companies might fall behind. AI can't replace you, But if we don't embrace it, it could outpace you. So remember, the pace of change is accelerating. Inflection points are driving massive shifts across a wide variety of industries. If we don't evolve our programs, we risk regression versus progression. Are you all ready for the challenge? So as leaders, we tend to focus a lot on goals and outcomes. What needs to get done? Who needs to do it? At what time frame? What deadline? But given this accelerated pace of change and the continuous shifts in technology, the work that we're taking on, the work that our team is doing, it requires a new way of thinking, a new way of problem solving. So my call to action to you is to reduce your focus on what or how, and instead, focus on who. I love this picture. Who do you have to become to stay relevant and to keep pace as the world changes? In 3 or 5 years from now, what skills do you need to form or sustain? Who do you need to spend more time with or perhaps less time with? Now, many of you are team-first leaders. You go the extra mile for your team, and that's great. I encourage you to continue to do that. But you also need to invest in yourself first. Apply the oxygen mask principle, which is to put yours on first, because the stronger you are, the stronger your teams will be. Now, in closing, my call to action to you is to first take a step back. Get clear on your future self. You can't hit a target that you can't see. So get clear about who you need to become to thrive as the world continues to change rapidly. Who do you need to become in order to continue to make a big impact? This could be your skills, your abilities, or who you let into your inner circle. There's a quote by Jim Rohn that says, "You're the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with." That's very true. Second, save time so you can focus on growth, professional growth. Eliminate, automate, delegate. Remember those 3 words. If you can't eliminate it, automate it. If you can't automate it, delegate it. Free yourself up so that you have time to focus on what really matters. And finally, create a do not do list. We spend a lot of time focusing on what do we need to get done? What are the key tasks? What are all the things that we need to achieve? But sometimes that holds us back from the things that are most important. So order your time. Find the things that you need to stop doing, put those things on a list, and hold yourself accountable to stop doing those things. The world is changing fast, and so must we. So always be ready to adapt, to evolve, and to stay ahead and not behind the pace of change. Thank you.